Hi, everybody. Mark Edward Lewis here, post-production supervisor and director of Star Trek Mind Sifter. Star Trek New Voyages Mind Sifter. This is the post-production supervisor commentary. If you want to hear about the story and the characters and the actors and the stories on production, that's in the director's commentary. This is all about post. And we'll just start with that first opening peacock sequence, which we started with. That was James's idea, which we just love it, and a nice way to open. This scene here, and forgive me if I get a little technical, but this is not for the faint of heart. This all this technical stuff we're going to talk about. This scene, that opening scene, you'll see a specific kind of a lens that we use. It's called a lens baby, and that's what our director of photography, Jeff Barklage, used to create that weird blurred effect that's we see several times in this episode. And we shot this at not at a hospital. This is a hospital at the Ticonderoga High School, which was built back in the 20s, and had all of these amazing, like this scene here with we're in this amazing auditorium. But in the background, there were modern day fire alarms and all kinds of crazy things. And in this scene, if you go back and watch Dr. Hamlin running across, there were several things there that Tobias Richter pulled out of the wall and cleaned up for us. And in the previous scene with the light, you'll see Pony Horton, our visual effects supervisor, redid that fluorescent light that's there. Is completely not the light that was there. We had a big square light that was not very period at all. You'll see and not see so much incredible visual effects work, and I'll try to point each shot out as it comes up if I can remember and get there quickly. And also the incredible amount of audio work. This straitjacket made so much noise on set, and all the belt buckles banging and all of these things. Oh, there's the lens baby shot I was talking to you about. See how it's sort of focusing on the bottom there and blurred all around. There's a shot of the door. See the window in the door? That isn't there. There's outlets that have been removed and a window on the right, which we'll see much more clearly later. That door's all Pony Horton, and that shot is a nice combination of our visual effects team, Tobias Richter and Pony Horton together. Anyway, so the audio. You'll notice the audio team did such an incredible job of doing Foley, and this is, I think, the first Star Trek New Voyages or Star Trek Phase 2 movie that's had such extensive Foley done. On set, there's usually so much noise that you can't really pick up you can hear maybe, I'm messing with my shirt, this sound. And a microphone is good on set for picking up dialogue, but no good for picking up footsteps and all these other things, even skin. Very, very, skin on skin. You can hear that. Very, very hard to pick up, and something that our brain tunes out in the subconscious. But if you don't have that Foley stuff in there, your brain has a very difficult time feeling like you're fully immersed in the movie and that you're dispelling disbelief is what we call it. So we actually sit down and painstakingly make all of the sounds of the movie, of the people in the movie, and even though you don't really hear it, your subconscious does, and it feels like you're there. And it's a really great process, and the team did a great job. This is a special effect that we did in Final Cut Pro X. We had such an incredibly difficult time doing this movie. We tried to cut it in Final Cut Pro X, and we will never do that again. It was very, very difficult, very, very time-consuming, wasted a lot of our time. Eventually, we got it, ported into a Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve, where Bing Bailey did all the incredible color correction and tracking shots, and I'll point some of them out. And then, because we had it broken into acts, and we had to drop in all of the visual effects, and here's, of course, Tobias Richter's ridiculous work, and Darren Doctorman's incredible work on the retro 60s version. So when we had to drop in these shots, then we had to combine the acts. Well, because we had very limited time to get them out, I decided to go back to Final Cut Pro X and assemble the acts there and the final lay-in of the audio, which works great because Final Cut Pro X, what it does do very well is export very, very quickly. So that was our final process, which I'll never do again. And the next movie we do with them will not be that way. That wall, by the way, is a completely flat wall. It is a wall flat. There is no window there. What you are seeing is a complete illusion created by Tobias Richter. And what we like to think about Mr. Tobias is that Mr. Richter is that he really has the Millennium Falcon, and he just flies up to orbit and has these ships up there, and he just shoots them with the camera. It comes back. They're so good. This is another. If you listen carefully, especially in the 5.1 version, surround sound version, you'll hear Whithrow writing on the pad. Just all kinds of fun Foley in this episode. And by the way, this is probably, I know it's the only fan film, or the first fan film at least, depending on what year you're listening to this commentary, ever done in surround sound, released in surround sound. And probably one of the first productions anywhere in the world released in surround sound, which is awesome. And again, Alex down there under the table making the lights on the computer console reflect against Withrow's face, making it look like its computer is working, which of course there's nothing there. Someone had fallen on that earlier the day before, and it was completely broken. There's nothing in the front of that computer console. And color. So we shot on red at 5K, which is a huge frame, bigger than what you see in the cinema, which is 4K. And so we had all of this latitude to be able to do some correction. And Jeff Barklage's lighting was really, really beautiful. And still, there's correction to be done. Not just like the visual effects shot of Tobias there doing his rotoscoping with Spock's head against that window, but just bringing down blacks and bringing out colors. And it's important for me to tell you some of the places where Bing Bailey went and color corrected, tracked people's eyeballs, tracked people's tunics. In fact, Spock's tunic is a radically different color once he puts on the yellow than, Sulu's tunic. And they're on the bridge together in the same shot. And when we shot it, we didn't notice that they were a completely different dye lot. But when we got to post, we're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And Bing just tracked the shots, recolorized Spock's tunic to Sulu's, and you cannot tell the difference. And some of them incredibly difficult tracking shots, mainly because the footage that we got out of Final Cut Pro X was really incompatible with DaVinci, and DaVinci didn't like it at all. So he had to sometimes do a lot of Mickey Mousing to get it right. But it turned out just so wonderfully. And then we're back to Tobias here, the beautiful Lexington coming by. The sound design that we used on this, I borrowed a lot of the sounds that we used from Star Trek Axanar. And they're not direct borrowing, obviously, because the heavy cruiser design of this era is 20 years later than Axanar. So, but we borrowed the idea. And with the D7 too, Axanar, we don't really see the D7, at least in Prelude, which at this point was the only thing that had come out. And we had borrowed and then re-edited the sounds and made them more moderner so that they reflect a 20-year technology improvement. And I think they're incredibly successful. If you listen again, if you listen carefully to the audio, the mix has different rooms of Spock's voice as we cut through all the different rooms. And here we're looking at Spock's tunic, which seems okay, soloed in this frame by itself. You might notice it's a little orangey, but as soon as we cut to the wide, you'll notice the difference. Well, you won't notice, actually. We fixed it. But you'll see his tunic takes a little bit of a different hue as we match it to Sulu's. Here it's got a little brown, a little orange, and look at Sulu's there. Soloed, you don't really notice. It looks a little greener. And so those are unfixed. We chose to not fix Spock's tunic when it was soloed in frame, just because it was a huge hassle and no one was going to notice. Now there, we colorized it. You see the difference. That has a color to it, and I can't remember why we chose to colorize that. I think there was an issue with the framing, and there it's uncolored. So lots of things happen in color correction that are so subtle, so beautiful, and that you don't notice. In fact, this whole frame, if you look at the original red footage, it's beautiful, but the blacks are high, and there's a lot of noise in the shot because we shot it at 6:1 compression ratio. See, there you go. There's his tunic, both tunics colored together. And I can assure you, when we saw this shot, it was not that way. It was glaring difference. And this shot in particular, so brutally apparent when you've got two people wearing two different colors when they should be the same. Very difficult thing to survive. And those of you who asked, no, all of those screens are actual screens on the bridge. No CG there. If you go back to that Uhura shot, we actually sharpened her eyes. Most of the color, most of the close-ups on the women have what's called Mitchell filters. We actually physically put a piece of glass in front of the lens to give it that old-style beauty look. And we left those in, of course, and then tracked eyeballs so the eyes were a little sharper and a little more in focus, which was otherwise not possible. And this, I've played FASA Starship combat simulators when I was a kid, hundreds and hundreds of episodes, hundreds and hundreds of battles with my brother, and I always thought that Starship battles should take place in 3D. And so in this movie in particular, Tobias and I worked, and Darren worked on making the ships move in a Z-plane axis more as much as X and Y. Again, another scene where there's a ton of Foley. You see the flickering that's going on there. That's actual power in the school, flickering in groups of 3 power drops, which works great for this 1958 hospital, but is terrible not only for the lighting people who have ballasts that won't work for kino flows, but for visual effects, because there's so many shots here in this room where outlets are taken out, windows, entire windows and backgrounds are put in, and they have to match that lighting as it dips like this constantly. Otherwise, you see this big square-looking patch on a wall where they're covering up an outlet or some other non-period thing. So it was a really, really brutal process for Pony and Tobias both to work this out. There isn't a shot here. There's nothing covering here, but if I can... Oh, another thing, or Hamlin's eyes. We sharpened her eyes. The Mitchell filters are on her, and if you look carefully, you have to look really carefully on the 2K version. Not here, but on her close-ups, we sharpened her eyes a little bit to give her a little more of that beauty and eye glow. I mean, Becky's beautiful anyway, and I think she was probably born about 40 years too late because she's perfect in this. She's perfect now, of course, but she's perfect in that era. And there, if you look carefully, the sharpening just a little more sharp than the rest of it. Pony Horton creating this shot out of nothing. There was no shot like that of the school. He took the facade of the front of it, which you can see, shrunk it down, and then literally created the rest out of thin air and the gating and all of the other things. There are so many Easter eggs in this movie that Pony has put in. So many, probably 40 of them. From the plane, from 20,000, you see 20,000, Terror at 20,000 feet playing in the background. At the plane that he has, if you can find it, the love bug is on the Guardian, if you can find it. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff. Herbie the love. I mean, just crazy amount of things, and hopefully he will do a commentary for us. This scene, of course, one of my favorites as a director, to see the handing off of all 3 Kirks on the frame at the same time: Brian, James Cawley, and William Shatner in the frame. Never could happen anywhere else. And we actually did this special composite on that television. We didn't do a green screen, and we couldn't actually get the TV to work right and play the video, and it was going to be an impossible continuity problem to try to get the video to always play at the same place every time. So instead of doing a green screen, we did a Luma screen pull. We did a Luma mat, and we let the screen just blank and flickering as it would, as the old screen does. And that Pony was able to pull the mat from that X-ray, microwave, whatever it is, cathode ray tube Luma that the Red picked up so well. So that flickering that you see on the screen is actually the screen doing that, and Pony just overlaid the old video footage, which is something I'd never did before, but realized it was possible. Again, Pony pulling something out of his hat. Nothing existed. That space, the window, the wall, none of this existed. He tracked to a shot that is this shot. That's a stationary shot. Originally, we were going to have him go through the window the other direction and look at him from this angle, but we never actually had time to get that shot, so he just did the over-the-shoulder. And it was just absolutely staggering. A fooling. Thinking you think you're gonna see the Enterprise, and then you're back at the hospital again. Just wonderful. This Mind Sifter sound, which is really not a Mind Sifter sound, it's the psychic link between Spock and Kirk, which I talk about in the director's commentary, how important that is. What it is I took all the dialogue of Brian and Brandon in this, Kirk and Spock, in this entire movie and mashed it in to this crazy multi-tracked whole, along with some of the iconic sounds on the bridge. And that's what that sound is. We did about 5 minutes of it, so we had all kinds of different versions. So, and I think it does a really good job of making things feel kind of bizarre, not so good. So now let's take a time, because there isn't a lot here post-production wise other than the color and the beautiful work that was just done in production. Let's talk about the music. And here's Jeff Bond as McCoy, who's also our music supervisor and probably the foremost authority on Star Trek music in the world, which I had no idea about while I was directing him. I found out later by looking at a CD, a Next Generation CD insert notes that Alec Peters had given me as a gift. And I looked and it said, Jeff Bond. I went, wait a minute, same guy. So I immediately called and I said, you've got to be our music supervisor. And of course, he has all these takes of music that no one's ever heard. And he painstakingly went through and chose some of the most haunting and beautiful scores that most people don't even know. It doesn't even sound like where did we get some of this music from? And it's just absolutely beautiful, hitting the moods right. He was such a good sport to work with me. You know, my first job in Hollywood was a composer. I wrote music for film and television for 25 years. So he was such a good sport to work with me in all of my perfectionism and getting the emotional feel of these scenes right. But the amount of knowledge that he has around the music of Star Trek and where to find the right scenes and the right music and the right moments, it just blows my mind. And just it's what really makes the movie so emotionally impactful, as is the job of music in general, is to move an audience's emotions. He just nailed it, as good as if the score were originally made. And for those of you, yes, that's McCoy's ring on his pinky finger. But apparently, now I'm not all about Trek. I don't know all the TOS continuity stuff. I didn't realize when they said, "Yep, that's the hand." His hand goes on. Apparently, that's the wrong hand. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, we couldn't get his wedding ring off. It would not come off. So, regardless of which hand was right, we had to put it on the other hand. Otherwise, he would look like Mr. Bling on his left hand. So. The music, and then I was also realized that very quickly that some of the scenes that we did, some of the shots we did are absolutely not Star Trek at all. It's just hardcore filmmaking to get some of the impact of this episode. And so I knew there would not be anything in the catalog that was going to work, the music catalog of the original series. So I wrote a few cues, pieces of music, and I just didn't even try to make it sound like the original. They just try to make it good filmmaking. And that's that. And it worked out. Love those Passard ROM scoops. Beautiful. Now, this is my favorite scene. These two, again, not much in post to be talked about here, other than the edit. The edit on this was so difficult because these two are drinking. And while that seems like no big deal, the fact is you have to keep continuity with how much water or drinks in the glasses every time so that when you cut back to them, it's not the wrong take. And I actually had to bring a couple friends over to help me cut this because the continuity was so disjointed. And there is still a continuity error. There's one, it's not glaring, and we just passed it actually. But the rest of the scene works, and there aren't any other continuity problems. And we discovered there was only one way to cut this scene and make it work. Only one way. Usually in editing, you've got all kinds of things, but for some reason, our continuity was not. We just did not get this right, and so there was only one way to cut it. Fortunately, I got everything in that I wanted to get in, including Scotty stumbling and all of those bits. But that Scotty stumbling part, I'll give you a hint, is the cut where the shot where the continuity error occurs. It's very very slight, but if you know where to look, you'll see it, and then it's painfully obvious. But otherwise, this scene is these two reached so far as actors, and this was probably the easiest post-production scene to do. Foley was fairly simple. There's not a lot of stepping, and most of the sound actually was recorded on set. There's a couple of ADR lines, ADR meaning where we went in and replaced the dialogue of the actors because the sound was so bad or wasn't recorded well. But on the whole, this scene was pretty simple and the to do. And this conversation we see between two high-ranking department heads is just so beautiful, so well written, and incredibly well performed by these two. You forget that these two people aren't professional actors. They should be professional actors. But what a privilege to have directed this scene and have it come so deeply, so emotional. I know it's not most people's favorite scene, but just it's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work from some guys who just love Star Trek so much. This was another sort of post-production nightmare, trying to get all of these cuts to make any kind of weird self-mind melding sense in the edit. And it took us a few passes before we got all of these into a sort of a montage that made any sense. And now, of course, this seems so easy. How else would you have done it? But sometimes in editing, you don't know, even as a director, knowing the script and knowing everything, sometimes you just don't know what you're going to do. How are you going to do it? And then you get there and you see it, and then you make your changes. This is more work by our man, Pony Horton, who at the last minute was tasked with doing these force field shots. Very TOS, very period 60s, the way that would have been done. Overexposing the film and pushing the whites way, way out of 100%. And it's beautiful, beautifully done. I'll give you a little hint. Doing Foley with those Klingon bandoliers is the worst. Because I don't have a Klingon bandolier sitting around. And all they do, especially against those tunics or those vests that they're wearing, is make noise. Tons and tons of noise. So much noise that it almost ruins dialogue recording. Now, fortunately, in this scene, I don't believe there's any. I think there's one line of ADR, but the rest of it we got on set, which is fortunate. Saved the performances. So what I did is I have a rubber gun cleaning mat. I know, bizarre. And one side's smooth and the other side's rough for like tacking onto the table. And I put that against what did I use it with? Oh, I put it against a martial arts dobak top canvas. And whenever Core moves, I moved this thing. I scrunched it up against this dobak, and it made what seemed like the sound of his bandolier every time he moves. It's kind of rolling and pulling against that sequined-looking vest. And it was a pretty bizarre fix to do, but I think it's successful. No one said, "Hey, man, what the heck is that noise every time he moves?" So it's good. I'm trying to think anything else about post on this scene. Obviously, Pony does the pain stick that's coming up, but I'll talk about the Mind Sifter that's coming up in a second. In the script, it actually said we don't see the Mind Sifter. We went back and forth on, are we going to see it or are we not? And it would have been Pony wanted to do it, and I kind of had to kibosh him. I said, Pony, first of all, we have so many other things to do that are what I call mission critical, part of the story. The absence of which means we don't have a movie, including these force field shots. And I said, look, it's scarier to not see it. It's scarier to see the cool light effect that Jeff Barklage does, which we talk about in the other commentary. And that's why it shows up. And I think it's so successful that way. Not seeing it, not seeing the instrument of his torture. And since we talk about it in TOS, and no one's really ever seen it, why do something that really needs to cost about $250,000 to make it look great, and just have this incredible LED effect that Jeff does? And I think it's way, way better. Again, Tobias Richter doing crazy stuff with cameras with the Connie, and our all-women shift. Just love this. On the left is a producer from another Star Trek show, Rebecca Larkin. On the right is Mary Beth, who did 18 different department head things, including makeup and continuity, all kinds of stuff. And in the back is Gwen, pillar of Star Trek New Voyages. And, of course, our new Sulu, Shy, who, among many things, does George Takei perfectly. And that wig, is actually the wig that I wear later as the Klingon, but I wear it backwards. Actually, no, he has another wig. That's his wig, and there's another Sulu wig, and I'm wearing that backwards. Spock's wig. There are shots that we've already been by, and we will be by again, where Spock's wig is doing some strange things, and some of our visual effects team had to go in and actually fix, frame by frame, the hair on Spock's wig to make it look right. Brutal and painstaking. Now, I'll tell you that we're shooting this on a set that's incomplete, and we had to frame this shot down because in the rec room, in Going Boldly, it shows that the top of these wall flats are blue, but because we have not completed this, this is actually corridor wall flats placed to be rec room, and they're orange, so we had to frame those out. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see, again, sharpening on Jeff's eyes, and we're Mitchell filtering him here as well. So it really cleans up and gives you a look into the soul of him instead of having it so blurred. And Da Vinci's incredible. It tracks his eyes as he moves his head up and down perfectly, just flawlessly, so you don't even notice. Now, I noticed looking at it, wow, look at all that sharpening, but I did it, so. It's a great little tool that saves so many things, including camera shake that you didn't want, and obviously bad color, but then you can matte things out that you don't want to see. That shot there with Zahn, there's a slash on the wall, a lighting slash. That wasn't there. We didn't light it that way. That's Da Vinci. And nothing post-production wise here except in the surround version. Originally, James asked me, he said, I want to hear his voice here throughout the Enterprise as he's speaking, because it would be. And what I thought he meant was that we'd hear the echo. So in the surround version, you'll hear his voice echoing around the decks. But what he meant was, I just want to make sure that we hear it on the bridge and in the corridors and everywhere else. I thought, I didn't realize. So in the surround version, it's you hear him very powerfully in the surrounds, his voice echoing about, which is super cool. Really wonderful. Some of these we've done digital zooms. This is a great shot with Spock where the camera isn't doing the zoom. We are in Da Vinci pushing in slowly. Now this is a dolly shot, which obviously is camera. But sometimes you'll notice, I did it the very last shot of K'Tumba actually, on James as his final hurrah as Captain Kirk, doing a subtle push in, which because our frame sizes are so giant, in this case 5K mastering down to a 2K, I've got 250% ability to push in, and it's a really helpful thing to have, especially since we're in 4:3, and I have the ability to pan and scan out to 16:9 because it was shot in 16:9 5K. So I've got all this latitude, which has been, saved us many times. And there, Jasmine again, a little sharpen on her. I think we're at a Mitchell filter D, which is the most Mitchell filtery you can get. And Jeff and I probably went a little overboard. There was a couple times with Hamlin later on where we did an D and an A. So got a little excited. But it's all right. No one's complained about the Mitchell filter being too much yet. Well, except Jeff and I. Now, this model of this D7, I didn't realize Tobias didn't build. He's colored and lit and done all the beautiful things that make it good. But this is if you will, an off-the-shelf model, which I believe was used in K'Tumba as one of the Mark IVs, not the Dark Destroyer or the Mark VI, but yeah. Now, you guys, there's so many Easter eggs here, so many. I'm not going to point them out. I'm not going to spoil it, but I can tell you that the love bug is in here. You've already missed it. It'll come again. So many Easter eggs in this stuff. The lights in the Guardian are practical, the lights that are in the Guardian. And all of the backgrounds from the Guardian back and from about, I'll show you on another wide shot. The sand ends, and Pony had to create new sand. Now, I got to tell you how difficult it is to make sand on sand. Now, we were doing this at wee hours of the morning. Now, that pillar there on the left, that pillar's CG. But if you draw a line to the camera, that's about the end of the sand on the left. And all of this background he made up from plates and matte paintings that he's created. Just an incredible. It took him 3 months of daily work to get all 40 plus of these cuts in, and the ones later. Look at that fat Klingon. What's he doing there? Oh, me, I mean. Again, Sulu's wig backwards with some sideburns. I'm bald, folks, just in case you didn't know. And also the lighting. We learned a lot that we would never do it this way again with green screen. We shot it in green screen, a big green screen. But we really should have shot it on a blue screen. And that way, any of the spill green light, that if you look carefully, you can see just a little bit of the spill of the green here and there. It wouldn't have been green, it would have been blue, and then it would have looked like the background. So that we learned a lot about how to do this for the future. Should we ever return or go to a planet that is blue, in fact, we would do that. Right about where Kirk is, his feet, that's the end of the sand. The rest of the sand is Pony Horton, which is just incredible. All the little Klingon sound effects of the buttons and everything. That's all our sound department, Kenny Gibbons and Alex McDonald. Just sounds that have never really been heard in this fashion. Just so much fun. So much fun. Now, Kor's voice originally... now, Clay, who plays Kor, has a really good voice, but as you can see, he's a little short and it's a little tenor. And we wanted him to be Mr. Colicos. So I originally the original cut, I had him his voice dropped way down, and James was like, it's way too much. So we dropped his voice just a little bit. And we do the same thing with a couple other actors, me included, to give it a little more baritone. And that's perfectly fine and perfectly normal. Again, this is an angle no one's ever seen before, from the backside of water, if you know what I mean. If you've been to Disneyland Jungle Cruise, that's the backside of the Guardian looking through. I urge all of you to go frame by frame with this stuff from the Guardian. Lots of fun Easter eggs, including Edith Keeler, if you look carefully. Here we are at 120 frames a second. Not much in the world of post, except just for the mix. This is original score, and Wendy Hinkle singing Amazing Grace. Yeah, it's just very moving, very difficult, dramatic lighting. Just a huge whole of great storytelling. And we had to shoot that a few times just to get this thing right and get the timing right, because we only had so much green screen and we had to get too close. We had to be too close to the Guardian to really to get him to jump. So we had to do the fight and then move back and get him to do the jump, so it made sense. Now look at this window. This is, again, nothing here is real. That is a cork board that Pony has created a car, a backdrop, everything for. And if you look carefully on one of the other windows, you'll see a hearse or a delivery truck, all kinds of stuff. He had the best time putting these things together. This is one of those shots where an outlet has been removed against the wall, and that's Tobias Richter. Oh, no, actually, Pony did that one. Now, here's another shot where the lavalier mic was very, very visible on her chest, and Tobias pulled that out. This is, I believe, no, this is a Pony Horton one as well. And if you know where to look, you can see just barely Pony's work. Taking out that, oh, no, sorry, I think that was Tobias, but anyway, who cares? The great and wonderful visual effects team of Star Trek New Voyages. Yeah, colorizing this, we decided to go with a little green. Obviously, in the teaser, there's a ton of green. But here we wanted to give it so that it's just a little sick. It may appear warm, but it's actually a shade of green. And we use that to good effect later on with when Spock touches Kirk in the hallway at the end in Act 4. You can see green, and we do it by changing the blacks. We don't change the mids or the highs. We change the blacks. And that gives a sort of an unsettling feeling to your subconscious mind that something's not right whenever you move those blacks around. Now here again, Pony Horton, huge Easter egg. A couple of them, actually. You see those radioactive signs are actually covering. Now this is Ryan did this shot. Radioactive signs are covering up fire alarms and all kinds of things that are a period. And all of that stuff, the rust coming off the windows, there's vines. None of that is on this very clean exterior, not to mention the name on the plate and the weather vane change, and I mean, it's just so much that you can't. If you just take a still and sit on that picture for a while and of the exterior of the hospital, and you'll see all kinds of crazy pictures of changes to that high school. And it helps if you know the high school, and if you don't, you may not notice it all. But those of you who went to Ticonderoga High, you don't look the same. It's a very difficult thing to colorize because it's just we were at high noon and there was not a cloud in the sky when we shot, so it's very, very harsh lighting. And then also for audio, it was very, very difficult to get the dialogue right because the ADR is such a different sound to the sound that we got from this very noisy exterior. At one point, we had some guy start up a huge lawnmower, and James right across the street, and James had to kindly go across the street, and he was very kind to wait for us to finish our shoot. This is day 4 of our 4-day shoot at Ticonderoga High School. There's another emergency sign there behind Hamlin's shoulder that isn't actually there. Emergency entrance for ambulances that isn't otherwise there. So this is a very complicated series of shots, lots of visual effects that otherwise you don't see, and I want to make sure you get all of that pointed out because it's juicy. And what I love about these shots is that you don't notice them. And the incredible difficult tracking. See how the camera's jerking around? We call it dutching as it rotates. Well, Pony had to track all of that. And there's a thing called motion parallax that when you move the camera, it's not just simple tracking. You have to also do a little zooming and all kinds of other crazy things. And it's not easy at all to make it look like it's dead with that brick wall. I won't go into all the crazy production hijinks we had to do to get this shot. That's in this scene. That's in the director's commentary. Again, we've got beautiful Mitchell filters and sharpening on Hamlin's eyes. This incredible genius background, which I talk about in the other commentary. This is another scene where audio was very difficult to get. There was a huge refrigerator and generator going on anytime we're in this office, and you can sort of hear the difference in Dr. Wright's lines versus many of Hamlin's lines, which were ADR'd. And we didn't have Dr. Wright available to us to do ADR, so we just kind of had to make the best of what we had. And what we ended up with is infinitely better than what we we got from production audio, but it still bugs me a little bit. And to me, the dialogue in this is what's the most difficult to what I consider to be excellent, just because we had so many production difficulties with the dialogue recording. And you'll notice that cool still of Kirk there on Dr. Wright's desk in his little handy folder, which I thought was a nice touch that set deck did for me. I didn't even ask him. Some really great set decoration people. Always thinking. And they've got a huge lot of props that they pull from. So, oh, you need another phaser? Oh, here. You need a Klingon phase disruptor? Here. How about that? Oh, how about this? Oh, you need another of this? How about this? Because they've done so many of these episodes. This is sort of a production note, but I'll tell you, when I told Dr. Wright, I said, when you take off your glasses, I want you to imagine that you're cutting her. It's a knife, and then what you do, you cut her. And it really made a difference for him. Another scene where we did a lot of green pushing of the color correction to make it feel a little more ill. And we're, of course, at bright daylight. And that daylight isn't real at all. The window, of course, Pony isn't having to do because it's not in the shot, but the lighting is all Jeff Barklage from what we've established the window to be, which on production we all know is a giant corkboard. All of this sound of him changing is me actually changing in the Foley studio because we just didn't care to record. I knew we were going to do it in Foley to get Brian changing. And of course, he's not actually changing, because we cut to this shot right here. So we can avoid all of that nonsense and continuity hell. And if you look at her lips, those are not the color of her lips. Bing went through and did a beautiful beauty pass on her. But when we got done, the lips that she had were actually kind of not red. They were sort of desaturated. So he went and did Da Vinci, tracked her lips, and brought up the color. Many shots, this is what's happened, where her lips got tracked and the color brought up. And Bing has some amazing tools for making actors and actresses look more beautiful, and he's used them here on Hamlin. Not that we really needed to, but we thought, hey, what the heck, we can do it. Let's do it. And I'm not sure we used it on anybody else, just because we wanted Hamlin to look so... We didn't want her to look perfect. We wanted her to feel real. And again, there's not much to be done to her in real life anyway, but we did a couple things. And it wasn't because the makeup was bad. It was just how we had to push the color and make it green. Well, if you push green, it kills red, if you know how a color wheel works. So we pushed the green and then went back and spot did a few things. So we have a little Hollywood glamour and glitz. This is just a huge effect shot that you can't notice. It's Tobias Richter pulling out at least 4 things, from an Ethernet port on the wall to fire alarms. It's a huge effect shot. Every frame rotoed in this shot until we cut away. Huge shot. Visual effects shot. Again, this is just what visual effects is all about. Doing things that you just don't notice. And this is also a huge Foley scene with lots of jackets and writing and camera stuff and mechanics, bare feet on carpet, stuff you don't notice. Oh, and then phones being grabbed and orderlies and people getting hit, and it's just, there's one of the most difficult and demanding Foley and sound design scenes, which again, you wouldn't notice. Oh, it's just a stupid scene in a office. Well, really difficult post-production scene. Another one where we had to ADR all of Dennis, the reporter's voice. Every line ADR'd. 90% of Brian's lines ADR'd. Hamlin's line ADR'd. And unfortunately, the doctor we didn't have available. So you do hear the difference if you listen carefully. Which drives me a little nuts, but this is... fortunately, I don't think it interferes with this telling of the story. Just for the perfectionists like me. And all of these sounds of rustling and paper and staplers falling and all these things we had to put in and manage and mix with the music and the dialogue so that it doesn't get in the way of anything. And then, of course, we added some fun folks talking, Ron saying some lines and me doing some voiceovers of these guys talking about don't let them bite you and all this fun stuff. Always have a good time at the voiceover sessions. This next shot, another editorial montage, which was actually easy to cut because I knew once we shot it what I wanted to do. But 120 frames a second at 4K. And we talk about how we choreographed this in the other commentary. But not Star Trek at all. And this is original score mixed with Jeff Bond cutting orchestra hits from TOS. So timing everything together was critical and making that montage really effective. Now, originally, we didn't have this newspaper shot. And again, I go frame by frame, folks. Pony's put so much Easter egg fun stuff in there. It's a reshoot that they went back to months later and shot that, along with the corridor scenes, actually. So most of this is fine. Here you can see Spock's tunic and how brown it is. Again, we don't care when it's by itself. We don't notice, but that dialogue it was for some reason very brown. This is, again, a very difficult dialogue recording situation. Most of McCoy's lines were completely unusable. He had a lavalier, and it was just rustling underneath his shirt the entire time. Almost every line in this unusable, and the boom mics were just not usable either because of the noise of the room. But ADR for most of McCoy and some of Spock, and very difficult to blend those together. But I'm hoping that it doesn't detract anyone from this amazing scene between these two incredible actors. Having never worked together, these folks have never worked together before, and it's like as though they've known each other for years and years and years, and worked together for years and years and years. One of the difficult things for Bing was coloring skin tone on Brandon, because Brandon actually, for the first time, is wearing the actual authentic Leonard Nimoy '01 makeup, the actual color and cake that Leonard Nimoy wears, which is why I think his color is so good. Maybe the first episode where his color is perfect to me. He looks like a Vulcan. And so Bing really had a hard time not making... I kept telling him, I said, dude, he looks human. See how they differ? See how there's a lot more pink in McCoy's face, even blue. But that Leonard Nimoy makeup on Brandon is yellow as yellow can be, and brown and beautiful. So he kept having to correct himself from correcting Brandon to be human looking. And he would look at the wheels where we look at color to see what skin tone's supposed to be. He's like, oh, this is all wrong. I'm like, no. He's supposed to be yellow. And people complain a little bit about how his lips are pink, but that's how it is. That's how it was. Even in the original series, you can see Nimoy's lips somewhat pink because that the LN01 makeup is so right on. We're blessed to have been able to get that as a resource. And I hope to be able to use it for all the rest of the episodes. Great moment of comedy there. Now that line there was McCoy's first non-ADR line in this scene. We were able to use it because he's not moving, and so the lavalier was usable. As is this line with Spock. We're able to use it. If you look carefully, Brandon has this talent of controlling his pupils. And this shot coming up here, when he looks at the computer monitor, you'll see his pupils dilate. And I asked him to do that. You can see it dilate. It's incredible what he does. Again, look at that newspaper, folks. Put it on a free stream and read that whole article. See how it's dilated? It's incredible that he can do that out of shock, out of heart rate, pulse increase. I have no idea how he did it. And that voice is Teresa Noreen, my girlfriend. Let's see. In post-production on this, one of the difficult things is those floorboards are boards. It's wood, and they creak like crazy. And so we constantly had to pull out the floorboards out of dialogue as best we could and add real footsteps, so to speak, in Foley. This line of Walking Bear is actually, that line is the same line from the close-up. And a lot of times we do this so that we keep continuity of audio. If I had to cut to his line that he said when I cut to the wide and use the audio from that, you'd hear a real strong difference in the audio quality because it was a different microphone, a different audio setup when the camera was in a different setup. So a lot of times what we do is we take the line from the close-up and just sync it to whatever's coming in the wide so it feels like it's much more contiguous, to use the nice college word. And many times in this, we're doing two different kinds of editing. In Katumba, we did a lot of L cuts where it's someone starts talking and then you look. Someone starts talking and then you look. But in this movie, we did both, where we cut to them to get their reaction to what someone's saying first. And as we move later, we see more of the normal L cut. And by the way, that sound design of the Enterprise coming in, no one's ever really heard the Enterprise warp into a dead stop sort of like that. And so what we decided to do is have the cool TMP warp type sound into a dead quiet and only hear the echo of the ship across the space. Again, sound in space would be. So that's why that's a really cool change on how warping in sounds, and I'm very pleased with how it all turned out. All of the sounds for the D7, we just had a grand time. Everything from truck sounds going up the grapevine to race cars to gorilla roars. All kinds of stuff go into that D7 sound design. Probably in the big flyby that it does, I think there's about 7 different elements just to make that piece go. The long speech. And so these are composites. That view screen is an actual shot of the actual view screen that's actually built on set. So that's not a CG image. That's an actual build that we superimpose the space stuff onto. And Stephen Dillard doing some really good Klingon for us translated. It's the real Klingon. They translated it for us, talking about basically saying a starship has exited warp, and all that is really fun. And that console, all of the effects on that console, none of that's real. That's all Pony Horton again. And just working with Frank Serafini had me because he worked on TMP, did the sound effects for it. And I said, when we were working on Axonar, I said, what is the sound of the torpedo bay opening on the D7? He said, oh, it's an oil fire. So that is what's there now. I talk about how this scene, the advent of this scene came together, but sound design-wise, I talk about it in the other commentary, but sound design-wise, so many elements in this. And right here is the guerrilla roar coming as the D7 tries to escape the punishment of the photons. We also went and spent some research. Fez found actual hull numbers, made sure we were accurate and to canon with the Lexington. And then, since there's no such thing as the Hawking or the Leonov, I believe he found the accurate numbers for those hulls. So those are both the same in the Retro 60s and this. A little sharpening on Uhura there, under the deep glaze of the Mitchell D filter. All the Lexington lighting, in fact, we wanted to make feel very, very stale in comparison to the beautiful Enterprise. Oh, that's Withrow's wife, by the way. Rob Withrow's wife as a yeoman, which was his request, and we were very happy to oblige. So what we did is we turned on the set's actually in a warehouse. And so what Jeff did is he turned on the house lights. And so we have all that Lexington footage, and in the early bit too, is with the house lights on. So that's why it feels so stale and green. It's hilarious. I said, how are we going to do this? We don't have time to relight it. He goes, oh, watch this. Lights come on. Perfect. Shoot. So when we see the Lexington in the future episodes or anything other than the Enterprise, we may have that as our standard operating procedures. More Tobias Richter. Shots that we've never seen, and a class of ship that you may not have seen before. Another brutal, brutal audio scene where Spock's jacket rendered all of his dialogue unusable. And then we had to go back and put the jacket noise back in along with the footsteps and then all of his dialogue and McCoy's dialogue. And it was a huge mess that has been solved with the miracle of modern filmmaking. And then the doors as they walk through was another huge thing. Those doors make a ton of noise as they move. And so all of those were 80-yard. And folks, that console really does work. When you push buttons, those lights really do change. That wasn't CG. When he hits those lights and the lights change, it's really doing that. But when Pony does the transporter effect, he does it in 2 seconds, but it's really a complicated bunch of shooting using Alka-Seltzer as the word. And I think Pony has, more than many people who have done Star Trek fan films, perfected and has worked with the guys who originally did it, knew them and learned the secrets, and has created his own way of doing it. It's just so perfect. It's so absolutely right because it's absolutely how they did it. This is another scene where Spock's hairs had to be removed because there were little cloth hat stuff flying off of the hat. We tried to fix it when we were there in production, but we had to shoot, so we just set it, and they one of the visual effects artists painstakingly put it frame by frame, took all these little hairs coming off the hat off, so that you can't see them anymore. And of course, that hat ruined all of his dialogue because it was a huge lavalier issue, and so we had to redo those lines. And that console, if you look at the lights on those consoles, the actual readout, square black readout, that's a beauty pass that we had to do. When we shot it originally, that doesn't put out enough poop, as we say, to get recorded in the camera. So we turned off all the lights and then locked the camera off and shot the lights by themselves and composited them in, and it looks beautiful. All of these shots coming up with Hamlin have the Mitchell filter and the sharpening track to her eyes, which is just amazing. I don't think there's anything that we've removed from these shots. The sound design, we almost didn't need to do sound design for this hypo spray because it makes its own sound, which is, when no one was looking, I was playing around with that thing. It's so well made, so beautifully made to the medicine floating around on the top of it. It was amazing. And this is Jeff Bond's second scene on set, first day. His first scene coming up after this. We shot it out of order. When you look at her eyes, that Mitchell filter, it almost looks like CG, the light in her eyes, how it flickers and does this pixelation. It almost looks like we added it in post, but if anything, we tried to sharpen it in post because it's so dramatic what those Mitchell filters do. All of the sounds of his medical bag, every bit of it, is Foley. We made that with my travel toiletries bag that I take on a plane. And my toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, a cuticle remover, fingernail clippers, and a bottle of hydrocortisone. That's what was in the bag. Not very 23rd century, I realize, but you can't tell the difference. In sound, really, it doesn't matter what you do. As long as the brain can predict that it should have been there, then your brain will tune it out and you're dropped into realism. It's really, really weird how it works. How your brain is so used to tuning out thousands and thousands of things, and that if those thousands and thousands of things aren't there, something's wrong. Here's a big color correction moment and a sound design moment where we added a woman's breath as the psychic link tension is released, along with a low-frequency downer, one of those, and then, of course, took the hospital finally to its normal warm 1958 orange, which we would expect to see from that kind of stock film. Also, Bailey added a real 1960s Kodak stock film pass to this to all versions, and just adds so much beauty to it, and also covers a multitude of sins. This is Brandon Stacy doing an amazing job with ADRing this entire monologue he has, which I was very sorry to have to do, but it was an incredibly noisy room. That we had no alternative to shoot in except because there was testing going on in the school, and they relegated us or demanded us that we stay in this little hallway to shoot this very important scene. We were cramped and there was no room. You see that huge window that was there. Well, we ran out of light, so we had to, because it took us hours to shoot this scene. It was like, I don't remember how many setups we had, 14, 15 setups, which in a big Hollywood feature is like, what, that's it? Didn't have 30. But in a fan film, if you get to 4 setups, you're running out of time. You got to shoot. You got to go. And we got to in the teens. When I start seeing that we're at setup Papa and Quebec and Romeo and Sierra, I start going, whoa, we got to get out of this scene. We got to go. But it's so much crazy continuity errors or issues as they go around the corners and all of this stuff that we had to get the angles. We just had to do it. Beautiful Mitchell filter on Becky and Brian both. A little sharpening. And the beautiful eye light of the omnipotent Jeff Barklage. And this dialogue is a little noisy, but and Becky did a great job of doing ADR with it, but I just didn't have the heart to replace it, and I'm so glad I didn't. It's a little noisy, but cannot change that performance. And all this makeup, so wonderfully done. And all those slashes that you see in the back, we call them light slashes, very period, very, very Star Trek. Just so fun to see them everywhere. And this is just, there's no trickery here. This is just, what makes this scene is the music, of course, moving your emotions. The actors, and there's no CG here. It's just Foley. That's about the only trickery that we're doing. And ADR. And the rest of it's just what you're seeing is in the camera. And what you're hearing is, well, I shouldn't say that. Actually, every ambience that you hear, the background ambiences are completely fabricated. They are not what that room sounds like at all. If you heard that room, if you heard the original dialogue, you'd be appalled. Like, what? That's terrible. So all the ambient noise of the room, again, your brain tuning it out, is not the right ambience for that room, but because there's ambience there, your brain says, oh, okay, it's okay. That sounds like a real room to me. And the same with these space shots. These shots also have ambience, and you think, well, why does it need that? Because your brain is so used to tuning out ambience that it has to be there, even in space shots. And even on the bridge, we have, you know, that stuff going on, but then we have ambiences as well. So to keep the brain involved in the story, not ever taken out. Even subtle takeout is not like Chinese takeout, but subtle takeout is something we want to avoid at all costs. And Foley and background ambiences, that's how we get around what we can't record on set. Things that are you just can't record stuff like this on set, especially in surround, unless you have a holophonic mic or all this whatever nonsense, which we don't really need to do. It's just easier to do it in post. And you have a lot more control, of course. Again, not a single CG element here, and this is all set sound and fake ambiences. So it's WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get here. The scene that's coming, the moment that's coming up here with Kirk, we had to ADR his voice. It's because we wanted it to be very low volume, like he was mumbling to himself, and we couldn't really pick it up from the mic that he was wearing, or the other. And this was actually Brian Gross's last scene. After this, he rapped and he went and shot a bunch of pickups on Bread and Savagery. This was his rap scene. And we kept working for hours and hours and hours till 5 in the morning. We actually worked from sunup to sunup that day. Brutal. Another very difficult audio scene. I know I keep saying that, but it was the bane of this production is the audio. And so much ADR and so many issues that we've tried to fix, and hopefully it doesn't take anyone out of the story and take anyone away from the beautiful dialogue and the great lighting, beautiful pictures, and I mean, the performances are just amazing. So I'm trying to think about what other things that in post-production we did. Da Vinci has been the savior of this production, and just, Da Vinci's free. Excuse me, Da Vinci's free, folks. So go get it and start fooling around with it. It's the way of the future. Really, an incredible tool for even a hobbyist just to fool around with pictures and movies, even home videos, and what you can do with taking out things and stabilizing huge handheld camera shots and just I mean, just staggering in ease. The ease of use is incredible. Incredible. We were able to take certain shots and put shadows in. And the very, very last shot, we actually added shadows that weren't in the lighting so that we could focus more accurately on Kirk as he sits at that last shot. And we're adding slashes and lighting and all kinds of other things. So it was really, really cool. Cool tool. There wouldn't have been another platform we could have used in time or budget. There's other platforms like Pablo and things like this, but we didn't have $100,000 to spend on a color correction. And also, Da Vinci does 3D, so go get it. Black Magic Designs, folks, and enough pitch. And that's the end of the movie. We originally it was supposed to be "Welcome home, Captain. Welcome home." Actually, no, that line wasn't even in there, I don't think. And our assistant director came out and said, "Guys, we need it to be welcome home, Jim, which is why earlier on the bridge, McCoy says, "Welcome home, Captain, welcome home." So we can keep at least the ending on the same lines as the book. And that's the end of our picture. I hope you've enjoyed this somewhat technical, hopefully not too droll commentary on post. And we hope to see you in many, many more episodes, and come out and visit. It's Ticonderoga, New York. We'll put you to work. You'll get to hang out on the bridge and build a whole new family of really, really wonderful people. Thanks, everybody. Idic in all things.
Please, call me Carol. Jim.
It appears to be the source of the anomaly.
This isn't anything of ours.
You all right? Energy discharge. Damn it. Respirator. If her respirator's out, she'll die. Put me down in Spock's coordinates. That should be near Carol. I will grab her. You beam me back up.
But, sir...
Now, Mr. Scott!
Energize.
How are you doing it, son?
Captain, that was an incredibly stupid thing to do.
You're welcome.
This isn't the first time you've had to deal with an attractive woman.
Bones. I have no romantic interest in her. That would be wrong and improper as a captain.
Oh, I agree, but that's not what I meant.
I need to explore all possibilities, including sabotage.
Well, that's one possibility I won't consider.
If someone out there has a weapon of that power, we have to know, is there an alien ship or not?
Or maybe I'm just plain stupid.
Okay, you are going way over the top on this.
Over the top? I have barely left the launch pad.
Dr. Marcus, shut up. Alien vessel. This is Captain James T. Kirk.
She's charging her weapons.
All hands red alert. Raise shields. Stand by phasers.
I'm William Mulholland. Bothered me about the whole thing. For years now, idiot socialists like Job Harriman and the gullible saps who followed him have been accusing me of either being in cahoots with the San Fernando Valley land speculators like Otis and Chandler and Whitley, or of being their patsy. I was absolutely opposed to the subdivision of the San Fernando Valley. Arable lands which should have sold for about $100 an acre had been seized by a few capitalists who then forced the prices to $1,000 an acre. I don't care what anyone says. I have never and will never accept payoffs from the San Fernando Valley Land Syndicate. This water is for the city of Los Angeles. No kickback deals with my ditch. If that's what they want, they can bloody well go to Chinatown. Instead of being developed as agricultural lands, the property was subdivided into town lots and small rich men's country estates at prohibitive values. But even if it had stayed agricultural, they still shouldn't have been simply entitled to water. As far as I was concerned, the Owens River water was intended for the city of Los Angeles first. If the ranchers in the San Fernando Valley wanted it, I told them they'd have to build their own water system or irrigation district at their own expense. Even then, they'd only be able to use surplus water, which they'd have to pay for. I mean, my aqueduct wasn't meant to be a giant garden hose for the San Fernando Valley, you know. No siree.